Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. So I think the whole world is focused on what's going on in Ukraine right now. I had a show on Monday speaking with a Ukrainian Canadian, and it was really heartbreaking and heartwarming at the same time to hear about how her family was doing in Ukraine. And so I wanted to reach out to some other people I know that are Ukrainian Canadians and find out what's going on with their family, with their friends, with themselves, and with their home country. And so I'm joined tonight by several people. Greg Lipich, who is a cybersecurity executive, Taras Kulish, who is a lawyer, and he's on the board of the Ukrainian Canadian Bar Association, Yuri Chumek, who is also a lawyer in Toronto and very involved in the Ukrainian Care Center. I think it's called the Victor Franco Center, and Andrew Popovich, who is also involved in cybersecurity. And Andrew, I think you're joining us from Vancouver. Is that not correct?
That's right.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for the show. And maybe, Greg, I can start with you. You've been in Canada how long, and how much family do you have in the Ukraine? And have you been talking to them, and how do you feel?
Yeah, I'm in Canada since 2014. So before moving to Canada, I spent some time in Russia. I'm originally from Ukraine. I was born in Ukraine, western part of Ukraine, city of Holodomor, very small town that is close to Polish border. And basically all of my family is in Ukraine. My daughter, my parents, my sister, her family, my son, who was born in Moscow, he moved to Toronto. I feel really bad. Like I was in a trip in Emirates when this news broke, and like I'm sleepless since 21st of February. And like we had, after a couple of first days, we tried to organize this community in Canada and in the US to help our country, because like everybody is thinking how to help right now.
Taras, tell me about yourself.
Well, thanks, Brian, for having us on. And so my name's Taras Kulish, and I'm originally from Montreal, born in Montreal, but my father was born in Ukraine. I have visited, Ukraine, and I do, I'm a lawyer, but I do humanitarian work in Ukraine. Specifically, since 2014, one of the organizations I'm with is called Hope Worldwide. And we have colleagues on the ground, friends in Ukraine, and we're trying to support them.
Yuri.
Yes, my name is Yuri Chumek. I'm born and raised in Toronto. I'm of Ukrainian background, of course. I have many families and friends there. My in-laws, in fact, are also in Ukraine right now. They're feeling very trapped there. Of course, men of military age are not allowed to leave the country, so it's tearing families apart. From the legal community, I've received a great deal of support and outreach on social media, including on LinkedIn, which is, of course, the networking site for professionals. Received a lot of offers of support and help, and it's just been amazing to see our legal community in Canada and Toronto and all over the world, in fact, come together and try to help and support Ukraine in this terrible crisis.
Andrew, tell us your story, please.
I'm from eastern side of Ukraine. I used to be a Russian-speaking Ukrainian, the one which is supposed to be oppressed by Ukrainian government, but we were not, and we are not. I was born in the city of Zaporizhia, which is a large industrial center in eastern side. I moved to Canada in 2014, same year as Greg, and I'm in west part of the country working in IT and trying to help wherever I see an opportunity, because both my parents and my in-laws and my extended family are out east in eastern region of Ukraine and in city of Kyiv.
Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us tonight. I think this is going to be a really interesting conversation with you. We're going to take a break for some messages and come back with Andrew, Yuri, Greg, and Taras in just a minute. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I'm chatting tonight with several gentlemen that are either from Ukraine or are of Ukrainian descent, and obviously I'm interested. I think we're all interested in what's going on, what's going on politically, what's going on personally, emotionally, with people both in the Ukraine and people that have got connections to the Ukraine. I've spent, gentlemen, a bit of time, about 6 months over the course of 18 months in Ukraine doing business. I had the opportunity to go to Kiev and to Poltava and some other city in the east, Andrew, that had like 26 letters in its name. It was Dnipropetrovsk or something like that. It was like unbelievable, most confusing city name I've ever heard. And Andrew, it was interesting that there were a lot of Ukrainian speakers and Russian speakers, and Ukrainian Catholic churches and Russian Orthodox churches, and it really did seem. And we were doing financing, and we were told to go to either the Western-oriented banks that were Ukrainian or the banks that were connected to Russia. Tell me a little bit more about this issue of growing up Russian-speaking in the eastern portion of Ukraine, if you could.
Yeah, sure. So I was born in the city of Zaporizhia, where 98, 95 maybe % of population were Russian speakers. And then 2014 came and Russia started to invade Crimea and influence events in Donbass. They tried to do the same in my city. About 200 people came to the central square and tried to start up the fight and tell everyone in front of TV cameras that these are Russian speakers and they are oppressed, and that's why Russia have to step in. But that failed miserably. Even though it's a Russian-speaking city, no one ever had any problems. Me as growing up there, or my parents, Russian speakers, or right now you can go in city of Zaporizhia, Dnipro, they simplify the name, or Kiev, and speak Russian freely. You will not be persecuted, you will not be targeted, nothing like that will happen. So the whole idea of Russian speakers being somehow oppressed can be alive in Russia, but not in Ukraine.
Are you Russian? Or Russian?
I am Ukrainian.
Speaking?
I am proud Ukrainian. I'm fluent in both languages, and I would never associate myself with Russia.
And so why did such a large portion of Eastern Ukraine become Russian speaking?
Eastern Ukraine was heavily industrialized area, mostly because we had access to natural resources. So iron ore, coal, they built big manufacturing plants for aluminum and various machinery building. At the same time, western part of the country, which Greg is from, if you pass that part of the country, you see almost no industry there. One of the Soviet doctrines was that in case of war breaking between West and East, that part of the country will be occupied right away. So they tried to move industry as back as possible, while still keeping it with some proximity to resources. And then we built this industry cities. They moved in people from all over Soviet Union. And of course, Russian language was something which united all of them. So that's how.
And so was this area of Ukraine taught Russian, or did they have Russian from several generations back?
No, it was taught Russian, of course. My city is the capital of Kazakh Republic, one of the first democracies in Europe. And of course, we've been speaking Ukrainian for generations and generations. But then you move people around across Soviet Union, you start closing Ukrainian schools and open Russian schools, and you do that in long enough to vanish Ukrainian language from day-to-day use. You end up with Russian-speaking city.
Greg, maybe I can ask you, because I know that you've traveled a lot between Moscow and Ukraine. I think, in fact, you said your son was born in Moscow. My sense when I was in Ukraine, excuse me, was that there were a lot of people that did business in both Ukraine and Moscow, and there was a lot of people that had blood relatives on both sides of the border. How can this happen between people that were so close?
Yeah, and people are really close. We have a lot of family members in Russia. A lot of Ukrainian families have family members in Russia. A lot of families in Russia have relatives in Ukraine. The point is, like, Russia tries to make a claim like we are the same people. The point is, we are not the same people. We have like not a little bit, but like really different values. Like people in Ukraine, they fight for freedom. They fight for their ideas. People in Russia, for some reason, think, okay, we are not ready to fight. This is a big country. Somebody will come and solve our problems. People in Ukraine have very different approach. And I feel this like from the very beginning of my life. I was born in this small city of Holodomor, the western part of Ukraine. It was like Poland in the past, like before Russia took that region from Poland. And I was taught Ukrainian during my school time. Then I moved to university. Our university used Ukrainian language as well. So like, then I learned Russian in school. We started learning Russian at 4th grade, if I'm not mistaken. It was like a foreign language for me first, but then I became fluent in that. Then business-wise, like, and developing my career after university, I was pursuing different opportunities and like working in software world. I got in touch with a company that had offices in Russia. Then they decided to expand business to Europe, and they started from Ukraine. So in terms of like kind of culture, there are some similarities. So that's why people can communicate easily. People in Ukraine can easily understand Russian because like of this policy in Soviet Union that like Russian was like official language for all the republics. People in Russia cannot always understand Ukrainian. So it's like some people in Ukraine would also not understand Belarusian, for example, but everybody in Soviet Union, ex-Soviet Union would understand Russian. So that's why people in Ukraine were able to understand and get the messaging of like the Central Communist Party, but they were like kind of, they had their own opinion on different topics, and they were, I would say, kind of more independent, like from the very beginning, and during Soviet times. So like we had our own opinion all the time, regardless of where you live. But then I understood, like when I moved through the country, when I moved from my city of Lubomel, then Lutsk to Kiev to enter university. So some of my friends were speaking Russian because they were like from Eastern regions, like Andriy. And even living in Ukraine, I started to speak Russian with some. If I met somebody and Russian was the language I used during our first meeting, I stick to Russian. Yeah. And then my family members, I speak Ukrainian. My son was born in Moscow because like I moved to Moscow to work for the software industry there. So like that's why, and like the story is like fine when somebody was born in Ukraine, then moved to Russia to work there. So there are many stories like this.
Taras, maybe I can turn to you. You said that you were born and raised in Montreal. When I was in Kiev, I got sort of the impression that it was sort of like the Anglophones and Francophones in Montreal. Is that an analogy, or no? It's not because they may have been taught Ukrainian, like Andrew was describing, but they weren't, from a Francophone family, a Russian family from numerous different generations. What's the reality?
Well, I think there's some similarities there, certainly, Brian. I mean, I think as someone who was Ukrainian Canadian growing up in Quebec, I felt, just talking about that reality, I felt quite a good deal more acceptance, from the Quebecois, because I wasn't quote unquote English, and my name is different, and they say, oh, what's that? So there was definitely an interest on the part of the Quebecois in the Ukrainian culture, and that it was maybe perceived as a bit exotic. So that's what I can say about that. I think our friends, on the line, who are born in Ukraine, can speak more to that issue. You know, in Quebec and Canada, we call it the two solitudes. I don't know if it's quite the same in Ukraine. I don't have that experience of if it's necessarily the two solitudes. I see that Alicia has joined us, and she's was born in Ukraine in Sumy, and maybe she might be able to comment a bit more on that than I could.
Alicia, welcome to the show. We've just gone around the circle, and everyone's been telling us a little bit about their history and how and when they either came from Ukraine or their parents came from Ukraine, and what their connections back to Ukraine are, and have they been talking to people in the Ukraine in the last couple of weeks? How about you?
Yes, I've spent many hours a day speaking to my family in Ukraine. I'm originally from a small town. It's currently being completely occupied by the Russian forces. There's no local resistance, so it's peaceful in that small town. But in my oblast, which is Sumska Oblast, and in the city of Sumy, as some of your listeners may know, there is a lot of violence, civilian deaths. So I'm continually checking in with my family in the city, and also trying to figure out if I can provide them with some aid of any kind. But the challenge right now for me is establishing a more direct route to them. They are on the opposite side of the country, 45 kilometers from Russia. So it is very difficult to get to them. It is very difficult to get people out of there. I have tried, and I unfortunately cannot provide them with any sort of safe route out of that region.
Thank you. Yuri, you said that your in-laws are in Russia right now. Have you been able to stay in contact with them? Tell me where they are, what's happening.
Well, hopefully they're not in Russia. They're in Ukraine.
Sorry, I apologize.
And hopefully it stays that way, and they do not fall to Russia. But yes, we visited them last Christmas, not this past Christmas, but the Christmas before, and we were in Kyiv, and we were in that wonderful market, the Christmas market beside the famous Sophia Cathedral. And you know, it's so painful to think when that might happen again, or if it will happen again. The family is in the western part of Ukraine, which is near Ternopil, which is also near Lviv. I guess their possibilities are quite limited. They've said even to get travel documents from the consulate in Lviv, they would have to cross so many checkpoints. And it you know, even though there's not much fighting in the western part of Ukraine where they are, or strikes of any kind, it's just, I think the word I used is trapped. And I think that is how they're feeling, even though they're not in an area of raging conflict. So they're in a terrible situation. I know I've heard from other contacts that it's very difficult to get medicine. And in fact, you know, I volunteer for the Ivan Franko Homes retirement home and the long-term care center. And I'm encouraging them to sort of focus their efforts on things that are adjacent to their mission of caring for seniors. And that includes medicine. But it's interesting when I speak to the residents who live there in the retirement home, you know, they are watching, many of them, history repeat, because many of them from the Ukrainian diaspora, they came after the Second World War. They were escaping Russian aggression. And so in a way, they're reliving this trauma from when they were teenagers or when they were young people going through World War II. And what I would say to our community is let's engage with them. Let's talk to them. They have a lifetime of experience that can help us in terms of wisdom to share with us and to educate us and to help us through this terrible time. And so it is terrible, but we do have strength and resources in our community. And that is very hopeful. That is very hopeful.
Taras, you wanted to say something.
Yes, Yuri used the word trauma, and I think that was one of the words that I wanted to emphasize tonight. This is not like an earthquake or a tsunami where it happens once and there's the event. I mean, this is happening every day, every hour. So trauma is people are getting re-traumatized and re-traumatized again. Certainly that's one of the focuses that the organization that I volunteer with, Hope Worldwide, we have people on the ground in Ukraine. And for the past 8 years, they have been focusing on trauma therapy for children of war in the eastern part of Ukraine primarily, but also there was, after that initial invasion in 2014, there were 1.5 or 1.7 million internally displaced people. And so that's what our organization was focusing on with the Ukrainian Catholic University and with the Trauma Institute in Norway on helping the children. And so now what we're doing, what Hope Worldwide is doing, is basically repurposing itself, and the psychologists, the people who are trained, are going into the subways, going into the bomb shelters, and delivering training sessions and delivering therapy, so that people who are living through this trauma right now can learn tools that they can overcome their anxiety. They can overcome the extreme debilitating stress that is happening. Now, our organization, we can't reach everyone, but if we're able to reach, people, a handful of people, and our target right now with our capacity is 10,000 people, and we're seeking a fundraising of $300,000 for that. If we can roll out more, then we'll roll out more, but that's what we're starting with right now.
Well, good luck in that. If people want to donate, is there a website they should go to?
Sure. Thank you. They can certainly go to hopewwc.org. So that's hopeworldwidecanada.org, but hopewwc.org.
Andrew, maybe I can turn to you and ask you a question. You said you came here in 2014 and that you're from Eastern Ukraine, close to the Russian border. Tell us a little bit about what happened in 2014 when Russia took over Crimea and entered parts of Eastern Ukraine. Taras tells us that there were 1.4 displaced people. I would have thought that would have left an incredible impact on the Ukrainian people to be invaded like that. Tell us a little bit about that, if you could. What happened?
Yeah, sure. So Russia had plans to acquire Crimea for a long time, even though there was a signed treaty between Russia and Ukraine in terms of security. They sent additional military personnel and troops to Crimea while we've been busy at Kyiv Maidan, protecting our dignity and future from Mr. Yanukovych's plans. And it was a successful, in their terms, successful operation for Russian military. And they extended it further. It was like a test for Western world after Georgia, after 2008, when they invaded parts of Georgia. They decided to test it once again and see if West will react anyhow. So they did Crimea, then no reaction. They decided to do the same with Donetsk and Luhansk. And when you go back in time and try to revisit with all the video footage of events happening there, you see that it's a small group of people, 100, 200 people starting this all, making a media presence for Russian TV channels.
To justify the war, justify the invasion. Support.
Exactly. And it wasn't people's natural movement to join Russia or to stand against imaginable oppression. Everyone was speaking Russian in that part of the country. And why my city of Zaporizhia, Russian-speaking, didn't fall into this trap and Donetsk fall into this trap, it's hard to explain for Russian propaganda. So they started the war, they put boots on the ground. It's It cost us 14,000 lives.
14,000.
14,000. And when West says now there is a war started 7 days ago, it's actually started 8 years ago.
I had a gentleman from Estonia on my show last week, and he said that Crimea and Eastern Ukraine was like a first test. Ukraine right now is the big test, and if the West doesn't stand up, Estonia, Lithuania are next. What do you think, Andrew?
Absolutely, we have no doubt about it. So Moldova, where the Russian troops are stationed at the moment in Transnistria region, would be possible and probable next target. Then, of course, Caucasus, Georgia, and all the republics of former Soviet Union out there, and then Baltic states and Poland.
Alessia, you said that there's no resistance in your town, but there is in a town close by. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happened? Has there been tanks? Has there been rockets? Give us a sense of what's happening on the ground.
Yeah, so all of the tanks, all of the military equipment essentially goes through my town. So initially when the war started, they just had a convoy that spanned hours upon hours passing through my small town. And and then essentially goes through Sumy, and that's where there is resistance. And there's no Ukrainian army presence there per se. It's territorial defense forces, which are essentially civilians that take up arms and have organized themselves and are attacking the Russian army. And that's why there's significant fighting. Today, there were reports, and I haven't been able to get in touch with my cousin in that city, that they have now hit certain targets that have cut off water supply and electricity to the city and the residents. So there is increasingly a dire situation, which is going to result in a humanitarian crisis. And I'm frantically trying to figure out ways to help them more directly. But as we speak, there are now recent reports that a nuclear power plant is currently on fire. And we might be facing a much bigger problem, right? Everybody remembers Chernobyl. There are indications that if something was to happen and an explosion was to happen, that would be 10 times as worse. So this is a very, very serious crisis, war. I think that the powers that be that make decisions are afraid of a nuclear strike or nuclear counterattack. But this is getting to a situation where you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. And excuse the frankness of my language, but we might be facing that type of a situation with action or with inaction. And it's getting to that point where it's getting quite serious. And it has been up to now, but as you know, a nuclear explosion has and sees no geographic boundaries.
We're going to take a break and come back. And I'm going to ask each one of you what you think Canada, NATO, the West should do. Stay with us, everybody. What an incredible conversation with Alessia, Andrew, Yuri, Taras, and Greg. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. It's interesting and it's an honor for me, but it is, as I said on the top, it's both heartbreaking and heartwarming to chat tonight with Greg Lipitz, who is is that Lipitz? Lipitz, who is a cybersecurity entrepreneur, business person here in Toronto, but across the world. Taras Kulish, who is a lawyer in Toronto, and he's on the board of the Ukrainian Canadian Bar Association. Yuri Chumak, who is also a lawyer, and he's on the board of the Ukrainian Care Home in Toronto. Andrew Popovich, who's in Vancouver, and he's also in cybersecurity. And Alessia I apologize, Alessia. How do I pronounce your last name?
Nahirni.
And what do you do, Alessia?
I work at Scotiabank in anti-money laundering and sanctions.
Oh, anti-money laundering. Maybe we can talk about the truck convoy in another time, but we won't do it tonight. Alessia was very frank in her comments about how tragic this situation is. And I mentioned in chatting with Yuri how some people think if we don't stop the West here, if we don't stop Russia here, the West will be invaded in the Baltic states. I wonder, maybe Taras, I could ask you to start. What do you think Canada, NATO, the European community, the West should do now?
Well, one thing that I've posted is that Ukraine is not just fighting for Ukraine. Ukraine is not just fighting for Europe. But think about this. Ukraine is also fighting for Taiwan. Ukraine is fighting for the world. Because what my friends have said, what Andrew has said, is absolutely true. This is not just Russia looking at where it's going to go. This is also potentially China and any authoritarian, totalitarian regime looking at where they're going to go. So this is one of the most crucial issues of our time. And we have to throw what we can, everything we can. And now that's a question for, political debate. I think that all of us are, concerned, extremely concerned about the humanitarian issues. Possibly Yuri might have some more thoughts on some of the international law aspects, because I know he's put his mind to that. So I would let him speak to that.
Yuri, what do you think? What should the West do?
Well, Ukraine has filed with the International Court of Justice an action asking for that court to make a declaration regarding the reason, or what I would call a pretext, for the invasion, which is the denazification of Ukraine and the alleged genocide that took place in the Donbass. And so they've moved for an urgent decision and for evidence to be given, and for that court to tell us, and hopefully it will come to this decision, that is an absurd pretext. And meanwhile, while that is being decided, we are watching an actual genocide take place of the Ukrainian nation. And that is the truly ironic part and the difficult part for us in the legal community to observe. In terms of what else the West could do, certainly I think it's very challenging for the West for NATO in particular to get involved. It's very tricky, but what they could do is provide airplanes aircraft to Ukraine. Ukraine can send their pilots to go pick up those aircraft, fly them in. I'm a patent lawyer and I speak with engineers all the time. I was speaking with one of my colleagues today who said we can give ideas from the West to Ukraine. And one is get these airplanes, these A-10s, they have tremendous amount of firepower. They can destroy those convoys that are stuck in 40 kilometers away from Kyiv. The other thing, ideas, we've all seen the images of people making Molotov cocktails. Well, there's a very limited range where you could throw one of those. But if you get a piece of tube and a spring, you could fashion a launcher and make those way more effective. So we can generate ideas here in the West to help in small ways and big ways.
Greg, what about something more? I've heard some people talking about implementing a no-fly zone.
Yes, exactly. So the point is that Putin could be deterred only with a brute force. He doesn't understand diplomacy, and he is testing the Western world. He is testing not only Ukraine, he is testing the Western world. That's why, and the air defense is a weak part of Ukrainian armed forces right now. So The best solution would be no-fly zone, definitely. NATO and the United States told us, okay, we're not going, our fighter jets are not going to get into direct air combat with Russia fighter jets, because that would be the state of war with nuclear power. That's fine. But like, we can use systems like Patriot missiles. We can use systems like THAAD systems to be able to shut down anything that crosses the border of Ukraine, because currently Stingers are nice, but like Stinger range is like only 5 kilometers. So you can shut down the helicopter or plane when it's near the airport, not when it's on a flight level of like 35,000 feet. So more weapons that could help Ukraine protect skies would definitely help. Something like Iron Dome that is used in Israel. Also, France, for example, is going to send some like Ukrainians, people who are citizens of France with Ukrainian descent, want to go and fight and help their families in Ukraine. So Putin is using this pretext. Ukraine is oppressing Russian citizens. Okay, French citizens are going to be in Ukraine, and then France can send their Rafale fighter jets to deter Russian fighter jets. So like Putin should be...
So Ukrainian, French Canadian, France Ukrainians, French Ukrainians flying France jets, attacking Russian convoys.
Yeah, and defending French citizens on Ukraine land, because like that's one of the options. Like, because like from Europe, a number of nations are going to send volunteers who want to help their families and their relatives and their close ones to protect their land. And like that would be a type of force, and that would be kind of legally something that would allow the country like France, Belgium to protect their citizens that got in Ukraine and got caught in Ukraine. Yeah.
Andrew, I had someone say that 2014 was like Czechoslovakia, and this is like September the 1st, 1939, attacking Poland. And while we declared war, or the West declared war against Germany in 1939, didn't do anything. And look what happened. It went on for 5 more years. What do you think the West should do right now in Ukraine?
You know, I wasn't a huge fan of our president just a week ago. And then he delivered Munich Security Conference speech. There was a quote there. No one wanted to die for Danzig, so they had to die for Dunkirk. We are doing exactly the same. No one is willing to step into fight for Ukraine. Then you will have to step into fight for Paris and London and other major centers in Western Europe and probably elsewhere. If you ask me how Ukrainians are calling Russian territory, Russian army, there's one word: Mordor. So we are fighting for light, we are fighting for truth, we are fighting for freedom in a whole world, not just there. What Canada can do, what West can do, not without stepping into direct confrontation. First of all, let's drop hypocrisy. You cannot fight Russia without cutting their source of income. So you impose sanctions in the United States, and at the same time you continue to buy Russian oil in the United States. You sanction Russian banks, all of them, but the bank which is used to transact the oil. What Canada can do in this case, we have huge oil supplies here. We have huge uranium supplies here, which is one of the another reasons Russia is there. We can make sure we go after all the Putin's best friends around the globe. You have his foreign minister Lavrov and his daughter. She is in the United States. She's a U.S. citizen. How fair is that to Ukrainian people dying in my city now?
Alessia, last word to you. What do you think the West, the NATO, Canada should do right now?
I think implementing a no-fly zone is absolutely key. In my mind, there is no option to have this war continue for months or years. Where I see that mentioned, it scares me. It's escalating very quickly. I think there are arguments against the implementation of a no-fly zone, and in particular, for fear of escalation of a further conflict and war. But inaction is not de-escalating. And therefore, I think I understand the arguments. I understand the fear. But this war is being driven by Mr. Putin. The humanitarian crisis on the ground is not only affecting the Ukrainians, it's also affecting the Russian soldiers who are starving and sleeping on the ground and are just not being treated humanely. The quickest way, and if I had a magic wand, the quickest way to end this conflict is to remove the person that is driving it. However, I have no idea how that would be done. So in the alternative, a no-fly zone would be my first step, fully understanding the risks, but understanding also the risks of not having a no-fly zone.
Well, in World War II, the senior general staff of Germany tried to assassinate Hitler. Are you suggesting that that's what should happen, Alessia?
I am not suggesting anything. I am merely stating that it is clear that this war is driven primarily by one individual with counsel from his closest associates or the people around him. I don't believe that the Russian people want this war, but it is very difficult, I think, to see a situation. I mean, the implementation of sanctions and all of these efforts, you understand, they're also hurting the Russian people. But, you know, are we in a situation where we can expect the population to rise up to voice their opinion on their leader such that perhaps he would change, or that person would change?
Well, supposedly, 1,500 people were jailed last week for protesting in Russia. So, and they're suggesting that maybe this weekend there'll be even bigger protests. Is that, you think, having any impact on Putin?
I don't think that I think that the situation in Russia is such that the influence of the public in the short term will not be effective in stopping the war. It has to come from closer circles, from the elite circles of people that have actual influence, close ties, that they can influence Mr. Putin more directly.
We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments in just a minute from our panel of Ukrainian Canadians, all either from Ukraine or of Ukrainian descent, talking about what's going on in Ukraine and Russia and what it means to them personally and to their families. Stay with us, everybody. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting tonight with several Ukrainian Canadians who are obviously speaking about what's going on in their homeland right now. And we've got Greg Lipich, Taras Kalash, Yuri Chumak, Andrew Popovich, and Alicia Neherini. Is that approximately right? I apologize for my pronunciation. In war, in terrible times, you often have leaders that arise. And I think your president has impressed the whole world. And some people have called him as important today as Churchill was in the Battle of Britain. Yuri, I understand you've met him. Can you tell us a little bit about him? and what your impressions were and what your impressions are today.
Well, it's amazing to think that he was elected in the role about 3 years ago. He was elected in April of 19, and shortly after that, one of his first visits was to Canada, to Toronto, and there was a big conference going on, the Ukraine Reform Conference. And yes, I got to meet him at a lunch at the Fairmont Hotel. He gave an address. He was introduced by now Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland. He was warm. He had the crowd in the palm of his hand, and I could tell how charismatic he was at that time. Everyone underestimated him, I think. He was not, in the West anyway, his rival, Mr. Poroshenko, was the favorite among the diaspora, but he was elected with a huge margin back in 19. And I cannot agree with you more about him being a Churchill type figure. And I would say we would not have the cancellation of Nord Stream 2. We would not have the SWIFT sanctions. We would not have all of those penalties and sanctions that have been put on if Zelensky had fled like the Afghan president had. He stayed in his role, and he has led his country.
Greg, I know you and I have talked politics and leaders a few times. What do you think about what he's doing right now in the last week?
Like, Zelensky is doing a tremendous job. Like, he shows like real leadership. Like, some people had questions of what he was doing like before, but like definitely last week, after the invasion started, after the war started, like he's showing the proper leadership. This phrase, like, I don't need the lift, send me the ammo, like it gives a lot of inspiration to people. Like, all 40 million of citizens and people in Ukraine are fighting as one, like with armored forces, with volunteers, and people like my sister, my mom, my daughter. They just help prepare food for armored forces. Like, the country is all one fighter, and like Zelensky did a lot for that.
Taras, some people think he brought Ukraine together, but other people have said he's brought the Western world and NATO together. The Western world and NATO are more cohesive than they've ever been. What do you think?
I think that's very interesting. I certainly think that the President Zelensky, he sets the tone. He's really set the tone, and I would even say that I would agree with Yuri. People underestimated him, but I think he's the right man at the right time. And even the fact that he is Jewish in the Ukrainian nation is quite something, because he's able to effectively argue and be the counterpoint to that argument that Putin is coming in to denazify the nation of Ukraine. But I would say that yes, he sets the tone, and he needs to set the tone. I think he's been doing an excellent job at that. And one area that I would like to see touched upon, which we were seeing some issues in terms of protection of minorities. I think in any conflict, we have to be extremely concerned that all minorities are protected equally. And so I think he is the right person to set that tone as well.
We're going to run out of time, and I want each one of you to, if you could, and if you're interested, leave us with a message that you want to give to our listeners in Canada about what you think we should be thinking about and what we should be doing. Alessia, would you like to start? What's your message to the listeners in Canada?
My message would be that Ukrainians, Ukrainian Canadians, Ukrainians anywhere in the world, really, we're a very resilient, strong people. We wear our hearts on our sleeve. We are passionate. We tell stories through song. We have a long and sometimes very painful history. And we are really fighting for our freedom. We're fighting for democracy. We're fighting for the rule of law. And I think people love that about us, and they admire that, but we cannot do this alone. And we can only do this for so long. You know, individuals that wear their heart on their sleeve also get injured very quickly. So we do need the support of the world, and we do need the backing, and in particular, in the short term, the military backing to protect our nation, to protect our people, our history, our culture, all that good stuff that you're seeing so clearly exemplified by President Zelensky. Please don't let that get destroyed.
Andrew, what about you? What's your message?
My message would be, we are not the one nation with Russians. We are different. We are better. We are self-organizing. We are not stepping back. We are not stepping down. We will get this. We need your support.
Yuri, do you have a message for our listeners?
Well, the Canadian curriculum was amended to tell the story about the Holodomor, which happened in 1932 to 1933, which was a great famine in Ukraine. It was a humanitarian crisis under Stalin. And we're watching history repeat in some ways with this great humanitarian crisis. And I echo Alicia and Andrew's point about that, we're watching it unfold, and we have to do something. We have to support Ukraine.
Taras, what about you?
Thank you very much. For Canadians, absolutely three things. One, emotionally support the Ukrainian Canadians who are have connections and who are trying to do something. Number two, financially support organizations that are national in scope and that are on the ground and that have programs in Ukraine. Number three, encourage your MPs to be in favor of providing military support to the nation of Ukraine.
Greg, last word to you.
Yeah,
what do you think?
In addition to what was said, like very good words, like I would like say something inspirational, just trust in Ukrainians and support Ukrainians, like Ukrainians trust in their armed forces and support armed forces. So we are one, and we should fight, and we should win with this strange guy. Like, I don't know if for how long he's going to be in power, but the whole world, the free world, should show what is freedom. Like, we are really fighting for freedom, not only fighting for our own freedom, Ukrainians' freedom, but the freedom of Europe and the free world.
I want to thank each one of you for coming on tonight. I really have enjoyed listening to you and to what you've had to say. And I think that everyone will agree that it's fantastic to hear your personal point of view. If I could end with my own point of view, I had a father-in-law that was Ukrainian, and he talked about the Holodomor a lot, and how unbelievably impactful it was on his family and his history, and what he believed about Russians. I also had a grandfather-in-law that was a Polish fighter in World War II. And he taught me a lot about what happens in war. And he was a prisoner of war for 5 years. I think that if we knew that the World War II would occur and Hitler would do what he did, and we could roll back to Czechoslovakia, Austria, or the attack on Poland, we would have done in the Western world a lot of things very differently, a lot faster, and with a lot more might. And I don't know that Putin's going to go to Paris, as Andrew suggested he might, but I do think he might go to the Baltics and to Georgia and to Poland, and try to recreate the USSR. And I think that we don't need another Cold War. We don't need another USSR. And those countries are sovereign countries, and they want their freedom and deserve their freedom and deserve their democracies. And so we have to think about, what if that was actually the future? And if we could stop it today, what would we do to stop it today? And that's what we need to do. Stop it today. Thank you all very much for joining us. That's the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960 with Greg Lipich, Taras Kulash, Yuri Chumak, Andrew Popovich, and Alessia Naharina. Thank you all very much for joining us. I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. Good night, everybody.